Kristina is a volunteer naturalist with the Friends of Sax-Zim Bog, a Duluth Audubon Society board member, and an avid birder. She enjoys co-leading Duluth Audubon field trips with her husband, Clinton, moth-watching, and exploring the many wild spaces in Minnesota and beyond. About 10 years ago, Kristina began birding as a way to incorporate mindfulness and curiosity while spending more time exploring nature. Since then, it has become more of a lifestyle than a hobby. Today, she is happy to share her enthusiasm and knowledge to help others learn about and appreciate birds and nature. Kristina will share with us her birding tips to live by.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here to offer some insight and maybe even some inspiration to my fellow bird enthusiasts. When I first started birding, I had some basic knowledge of our more common birds. As my husband likes to say, I knew enough to be dangerous. I knew I would need binoculars, and I knew I wanted a good field guide. So I picked out an entry-level, can you help me share the screen? An entry-level pair of binoculars. And drum roll. Should it be advancing?
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Entry-level pair of binoculars and my Sibley field guide to the birds of Eastern North America. This is the field guide after many years of love and use. One of the best things I think about birding as a beginner is that you really don't need a lot of gear. You don't need a lot of equipment to get started. As with many things in life, a good approach can get you far. So today I just want to share some of the highlights of my personal approach. First off, I recommend being prepared. Setting yourself up for success and peace of mind while in the field so you can focus on the birds is one of my essential ways of being successful in the field. So the first thing I recommend is to prepare your mind. I like to know the location that I'm going to be birding in. I like to look at a map, usually Google Maps, sometimes a paper map. But I like to assess how far I'm going to need to travel, where we can get gas if necessary, and just gain a general awareness of the surroundings I'll be birding in. And then after I know where I'm going, then I like to make sure I've studied up on the birds I'm likely to encounter. So I like to brush up on field marks, calls and songs, and then also anytime I can get some insight to their behavior. That's something I try to focus on as well. Another thing I like to consider when I'm doing this preparation of my mind is making sure that I've got the timing right. So time of year, seasonality with birds is pretty important, and understanding that can really help your chances of seeing them. And then also time of day. It's nice to know you're going to have a good chance at seeing your birds when they're more active, and you can plan your travel accordingly. The second thing I do to get prepared is I prepare my gear. I always recommend considering having a bag that's packed and ready to go whenever you have the inkling to go birding. I like to make sure that my optics are ready, my binoculars. I always like double check those, make sure they're clean enough to see through. It is better if you can see through them. I really highly recommend a comfortable strap or a harness so you don't end up with any kind of back pain or neck pain or anything after a hard day of birding. And then also make sure that you have sunglasses, your scope if you're doing some long range birding, and a camera if that's something that you want to use to document what you're seeing. Then I think it's important to make sure that you're going to be comfortable in the clothing you've chosen. So check the forecast and then plan for it to be wrong. So that to me means I'll wear what I think I need to wear, but bring rain gear, bring an extra layer. Always be prepared for whatever Minnesota has to hand us weather-wise. And then the last piece of gear that I find to be essential are books. For me, I like to determine, is my basic field guide going to be enough today? If I'm going out in search of anything specific, I might take a more focused, specified guide. It just kind of depends on what I'm doing, especially generally when we go and do gulls. That's a time when you bring a few books in case you see something cool. And then the last thing I recommend is a notebook. Notebook can be helpful when you're getting started. You can make notes on field marks if you don't know what you're seeing, so that you can kind of look back and maybe get an idea after you get home. And also it's good to document where you're seeing things in case you want to submit your observations to eBird, things like that. Okay, and then the last thing as far as preparation goes is to prepare to meet your physical needs while you're in the field. So, so you don't get too hungry or hangry. If that's the case, make sure you pack snacks and light meals whenever possible. I know sometimes we have to leave spur of the moment because there's a rarity to chase or something like that. So maybe you don't have time to plan, but maybe try to have a couple snacks in your bag. For me, I always remind myself to consider how much field time am I willing to lose to having to get food and things like that. So again, having that gear all packed up and ready to go is really helpful. And then beverages are also pretty important. I know a lot of us need a little caffeine to get started and also to get through a long day. So having a travel mug with your coffee or tea, maybe having a thermos with extra hot water and a couple extra bags of tea or some instant coffee, so you can do what you need to do on the go. And then plenty of drinking water. Getting dehydrated will also not feel great long-term and for the rest of the day. So set yourself up to feel good and just be able to focus on those birds. And then if we're talking about hydration, we also need to consider where the nearest restrooms are. That's something that you can kind of get a picture of while you're doing your map research, but also when I'm out in the field, I always try to keep my eyes peeled in parks and just kind of gauging, is there a toilet around or is there a porta potty? And that's not just for myself, but in case I'm with somebody or we're doing a group, it's always really good to be able to make sure you can keep everybody comfortable. So last thing is to make sure you have considered any special considerations for yourself or for people you're birding with. For me, I'm a contact lens wearer, so that's a pretty big deal. I need to make sure that I've got everything I can to keep these peepers peeping when I'm in the field. Okay, so the next thing, think like a bird. Seems pretty light, but I always think in order to find birds, it's helpful to have a deep understanding of their needs and what drives them. Essentially, you try to put yourself in their shoes, and hopefully that helps you find them. Some ways to do this are to know the preferences of food for your target birds. Here's a lovely little pine grosbeak eating some mountain ash. So knowing if your birds of desire are going to be looking for fruit or insects, or if they're going to be hunting for frogs, snakes, anything. If they're focused more on seeds, you can find bird feeders and also other sources of seed in the field. Just something to consider when you're out in the field. And even if you're not seeing any birds, if you can identify those food sources, oftentimes that can help direct you to some birds coming in. Water is another big one. When I'm doing my map homework, I like to locate the water sources that will be in the area I'll be birding. So you can look for obvious and permanent water features like lakes and rivers. If you're on the ocean, those are all great places to look. Remember, edges are really important for birds. So water edges are awesome. And then also, obviously, you can look out over the water for things like waterfowl and raptors who eat fish and things like that. But I do think it's important to note that water treatment ponds, or as we like to call them in our household, sewage ponds, they are an amazing spot to look for birds, especially in migration. Oftentimes they pop up in places where maybe there isn't a larger body of water, and they can be a really great spot to see some passing bird friends. Another thing to consider as far as water goes is more ephemeral sources of water. So things like ditches, seasonal streams and ponds. Open water in winter is a big one. Anytime you get a little open water, you'll probably find something using it. So that's a key up here in the wintertime. And then also, if you're in an area where you don't have any water, there's no sewage pond, never underestimate the value of a good puddle. If you can find a puddle in an area where you don't have birds, you have a really good shot at seeing something that's going to be interacting with that little puddle. And then lastly, I like to consider the bird's seasonal habitat needs. So if it's in a migration season like spring or fall, identifying those migration corridors, so knowing the paths they're going to take so that you can, within those corridors, identify stopover habitat, places where those birds are going to stop for food, water, a little shelter for safety and rest. Those are all going to be good things to locate so you can find the birds. During breeding or nesting season, all the way through pre-migration, you can target bird species based on their preferred habitats pretty well. It's a little more challenging. You don't have the same density of birds. So birding by ear can be key if they're making any sounds. In that breeding season, you'll definitely notice them, but nesting season tends to be quiet. So you just have to be patient and know your stuff. And then for residents and non-migratory species, I recommend just familiarizing yourself with the specific habitat needs and seasonal cycles of those birds. They are widely varying, and knowing those things before you get out in the field will be very helpful. Okay, so now we're going to get nerdy about it. I think we can all agree birds are interesting. There are so many things to be fascinated by when it comes to birds. And I encourage you to give yourself full permission to be curious. Dig into what excites you about birds. That can be birding by ear, studying feathers and molt, rising to the challenge of a difficult ID, aging and sexing, especially when it comes to more challenging birds. Listing, I know a lot of people are really into listing. They get a little competitive or just like to see how far they can go themselves as an individual. And then on the other side, there's mindfulness, just getting out and being open to what you see. Records like state records, county records, those are all very fascinating. The excitement and thrill of visible migration, it's pretty easy to get nerdy about that. And vagrancy, finding those rare birds popping up. And then if you're a weirdo, you can get into gulls. Some of the resources I like to use in getting pretty nerdy about stuff, books especially. Clinton and I always like to joke that the best guide is more than one guide. And so we have lots and lots and lots of books to choose from. I recommend just picking up what seems interesting to you and using it. It might become a new favorite. It might stay permanently on your bookshelf, or you might use it and then decide to pass it along. And I love the MOU book sale for used books after that. So you can get rid of some that you're maybe not using as much, but also find some new ones for your own bookshelf. I also highly recommend using eBird. It's a wonderful website for exploring their data. When I first got started, it was really fun to use that to answer my when and where questions for arrival dates, what can I expect in any given hotspot, those kinds of things. So on the website, you can explore that data. It's wonderful. You can also submit your own observations. But the app for smartphones is awesome for submitting data in the field. I highly recommend that too if you want to get into that, or if you already do, but maybe you just use the website. There's an app and it makes it really easy and fast in the field. When I first started, one of the biggest tools I used was the Audubon Bird Guide app. It's essentially a field guide, but it has the major added benefit of calls and songs. And so I would use that almost daily just to make sure I knew what I was looking for and what I could encounter. It has an explore feature with data from eBird, from other birders' submitted observations. And it would detail birds seen recently at hotspots. So anytime I was going out birding, I could look at that app, scroll through, see what birds are being seen, and then click on them and make sure that I had all my field marks and all my calls as well drilled into my brain as possible. And I think that prepared mind thing that we've talked about is pretty essential. It was definitely key for me, especially in the beginning. And then perhaps most important is experiential learning. I think that was another big key for me. I started off birding mostly alone and then started getting a little brave and joining things. So then I was able to observe and learn from more experienced birders, and that was really motivating and incredibly educational. But other things you can do for experiential learning, you can attend visible migration events, especially my experiences up at Hawk Ridge have been amazing. The repetition of seeing those species go over and over and over again really helps get those ID cues strong. And I'm always surprised at the ability I have to ID hawks and raptors when the season comes around. Another thing you can do is just practice spotting birds and movement. That was another big thing I did, especially from the car. When you're spending a lot of time in the bog, you do drive around a lot. And so just training your brain to sort of pick out anything that could be bird shaped, even if it's just a weird tree or leaf or something silly like that. It never hurts to just look at that thing that looks different. And also just training your eyes to look for movement when you're out in the field and running around. That can be really essential. And it's something that I try to emphasize when we're out birding with new folks. Just train your brain. And then also for experiential learning, I recommend just really spending time listening and observing. Just being out there and soaking it all in, taking your time with the birds and really getting to know their behaviors and familiarizing yourself with them. All right, so the next one is find and build community. I think one of the greatest benefits of being a birder is the wonderful community we get to be a part of. Whenever there's a rarity to see or an event like this one, it feels like a family reunion or better, depending on your family. Some of the ways I like to find and build community as a birder are to connect and contribute. I really like to get involved with local bird and conservation groups. I know a lot of us do, and it's really awesome way to learn and get to see our friends again. But also, so aside from just attending programs and events, there's also a lot of opportunities to volunteer. I highly recommend doing that as much as you can. It's fulfilling, but also very educational, and making those connections with other people in the community will never hurt your chances at seeing more birds. I also recommend getting into citizen science. Submitting your observations to eBird is a really easy way to get into that. Christmas bird counts are a wonderful thing you can get involved with around the holidays. You don't have to do just one either. You can do as many as you can stand, and they're super fun. And then also bird monitoring and surveying opportunities have been great for me for learning opportunities as well. Many of us as birders might be a little more introverted. I know I am, but getting out and birding with others is an awesome way to build community. So get out and bird with people who will challenge you. That's a great way to keep your skills sharp. and also keeps you really honest about what you're seeing. You can share your own knowledge and experience. That's a great way to solidify some knowledge you have, just to use it and to share it with other people, like new birders, kids, really anyone who is interested. A lot of people I know through my job know that I'm the person to ask and share those bird experiences with. And I think that that connection is really cool and important. And I just want to emphasize getting excited about shared experiences. I know we're all, you know, doing what we got to do, but sharing an experience with a bird can be a really special way to connect with somebody. And it just adds to the enjoyment of birds in general. All right. So the last thing I want to recommend is to make birding a daily practice. I often credit my inspiration to start birding seriously to the book Zen Birding. Because of that book, about 10 years ago, I decided to dedicate 1 year to seeing as many birds as I could. That year served up unimaginable difficulty and grief, but my dedication remained. Every day, I made my best effort to set aside my troubles to watch or seek a bird, even if it was just for a moment or two. That daily practice has grown and is now so deeply ingrained that I often joke my motto is never not be birding. Every day, at least one moment, even on hard days, maybe even especially on hard days, get out there or look through your window at a feeder. Just show up, be present in that moment, and experience the world outside of yourself. It is a wonderful way to put things back into perspective when things get tough, but also it's a great way to use all of your senses and really like just make a shift in the day. It's also beneficial to us. It helps us build our skills. You can really build your knowledge fast by doing this every single day. And then over time, it helps build instincts, and the instincts are really awesome and essential to being successful as a birder out in the field. So I recommend you challenge yourself to get out as much as you can and really, honestly, just have fun. It's maybe the biggest, most important one. So happy spring, everyone. I hope you find joy as well as birds.
Kristina, thank you so much. I completely love your motto, never not be birding. It cracks me up. And it's I think quite true for many of us. Whenever you step outside, that's what you're looking for, right? Rather than oncoming cars. Hopefully pay a little more attention than I do.
Yes. Safety first, but birds a close second.
Exactly. We've got a couple questions for you from the audience. And the first is, do you ever use headphones or any other listening device to enhance your hearing of birds?
Headphones as like when I'm practicing? Sure.
I
I do listen to bird calls in headphones sometimes. Oftentimes just over a speaker, or we've done playlists in the car of different birds. If we're targeting a habitat, I know my sister was really good about making playlists for certain habitats, and we would practice in the car that way. I don't use headphones as much, but I do think that there's some benefit there, especially because there can be such subtle nuance between species. Yeah, I think that headphones are to each their own. Go for it. It's not going to hurt anything. Right. But it's not my like general go-to.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for a good entry-level binocular?
That's a great question. I am still kind of seeking the best. I know a lot of people ask this question. I always kind of think that the best entry level is maybe a secondhand pair of a step above. So I don't know if that's something that's usually available. Some people have been trying out, there's some new brand called Knox, and that they seem okay, The ones that I started off with were Pentax Papilio, and they are not a long range binocular at all. I got them because I really like insects too. So they do close up zoom really well. And I just figured like I wasn't good enough to really be doing long range at that point. So I was like, maybe I'll just do these, and then I'll have something I can look at butterflies and bees and stuff with too. And so that's where I started, and it was fine. It was a great pair of binoculars until I just outgrew them, sort of.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much again, Kristina. We really appreciate you taking the time this morning to speak with us.